Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I'm Chip Brown of Horns247.com. Joined as always by my esteemed colleague, who's kind of got the Barbara Walters soft lighting going on today, the one and only Eric Henry of Horns247.com. Eric, full disclosure, it is June 18th. We are a month from SEC Media Days in Big D, Dallas. What? The SEC has moved their media days to Dallas in the first year of Texas and Oklahoma joining the league? That was nice of them, huh?
What is going on, Chip Brown? First off, we all can aspire to be like the great Barbara Walters, an icon in journalism. That aside, yeah, I mean, it was nice of them. It cuts down on a trip for us. I will say this, Chip, the former conference of the Longhorns, the Big 12, almost at Big 10.
You almost said the All-State 12 or the Trojan
All-State
12 or whatever they're going to call this thing.
And then trying to remember how many teams are in the Big 12. No, that conference. They moved to Vegas, which I will not lie, a little jealous only because of the fact that Vegas is one of my favorite cities in the United States. Try not to spend too long, but it's one of my favorites. I will say this, Chip Brown, I'm sure you can vouch for this. How long is it until they move SEC Media Days to Destin? Could we be trusted? Could the Media Corps be trusted with an entire 3-4 days in Destin, in addition to SEC meetings? I don't know. That'd be tough, but I don't think it'd be a hard sell. How about that?
No, it would not be a hard sell. It would not be a hard sell. Although, right after I left Destin in the SEC spring meetings, there was all kinds of sharks appearing on those beaches in Destin. I guess it's kind of a mating time for certain sharks, but yeah, I did go into the ocean. So there were a bunch of jellyfish. You got to be careful, Eric. Got to be careful. Maybe we just stay at the hotel pool. I don't know.
There's that aspect, and also I will say this in all seriousness. Maybe where it would get a little tough is it's hurricane season, right? So that's where it gets a little iffy, right? So between that and the sharks. Now listen, if you have the suite that Chip Brown had, the hotel pool, it's looking right at you. It's pretty sweet. But with that being said, we will spare you our media travel, wishes for another day, but just food for thought.
Yeah, and that I had a good view, but it was a nice, tightly compact little room. But yeah, no, big fan of Destin, Florida, and those spring SEC meetings, Eric. But we are previewing Texas football 2024. We're closing in on the June 30th SEC party that Texas is throwing on campus. We now know Pitbull, Mr. Worldwide, will be performing at that concert or party. And Eric, I got to say, before I ask you for your opinion, full disclosure, my adorable wife, the lovely Elle Brown, she loves her some Pitbull, and I would roll my eyes. And then she said, we're going to the Pitbull concert. It also included Ricky Martin and Enrique Iglesias. And I got to say, Pitbull, he puts on a party. So I kind of think he's a good choice for this. All of his music is all upbeat. It's like a party. It's like you're in the club. Am I crazy? Do I sound like an old fogey? What say you, Eric Henry, the young, hip Eric Henry?
Here's what I'll say about Pitbull, right? And it's funny. I had a chance to look at our Horns 24/7 message boards, and it was about 50-50, Chip, when the announcement was made. Some people said, hey, it's not about us. I'm sure Pitbull's a hit with the college age folks. And listen, I'm sure that has to warm the heart of plenty of Pitbull fans to know that they are still in the college age realm. I think the reason why it's a good choice is because, as you talked about, Pitbull throws a party, and that's what this is, right? I mean, I don't think, Chip,
Fireball.
as someone who listened to Pitbull when he was a little more in the hip hop rap realm. Now he's probably more of just kind of just the dance pop, whatever genre you want to call it. It's a good choice because people just want to have a good time. I think that's where the appeal is. You don't necessarily have to know Pitbull songs, and I hope the lovely and equally lovely as she is talented Elle Brown is not listening when I say this, but you don't have to know the lyrics. You don't have to like really know, like the what I'll call very generic Spanish that Pitbull is using in his songs. It's just there just to have a melody and a beat to go along with, right? So are you being an old man? I think Chip, you are, as I've gotten to know you, you're young at heart, and I think you'll appreciate the vibe that is Pitbull. So in all seriousness, like I think, did it surprise me? It surprised me at first, but when I have a chance to really chew on the selection of Pitbull, there's going to be, Chip, what would you guess? 10,000, 20,000 people in the vicinity, and I think they all are going to have a good time. I don't think anyone is going to be left out. Considering the mood will be festive, I think Pitbull's a good choice.
Did you have like a band in mind or an artist in mind for when this party was announced? That, man, if they could land that artist.
I won't lie. So I think I'm still getting a feel for kind of the demographics of where I'm at, right? Because I was thinking a choice that I thought would be just wholesale. You're not going to find very many no's. I was thinking like Hootie and the Blowfish. I was thinking a little Darius Rucker vibes. I felt like that would be something that you weren't going to get much pushback from. I mean, if it were me, again, it depends on who you're catering to, right, Chip? Because the students, it's summer, right? So students won't necessarily be around. You and I were on campus when Travis Scott dropped his collection at UT, right? Like if we're doing this in August, September, you say that, it's fine. Someone who I thought was a little bit of a dark horse, kind of keeping in the Pitbullish realm, like Bad Bunny. I mean, whoever you think Pitbull is now, like Bad Bunny probably is that person. I thought that one would go over pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have anyone in my mind who I thought was like, that's the choice. I'm still getting a feel for the demographics of who would be there. I even mentioned like George Strait, right? I felt like if you could pull that one off, that one that would be universally kind of liked in the area. But again, like you're not going to find anyone who's going to, Pitbull might not be something, Chip, that anyone listens to on their daily basis, like their daily, lives. But you'll have a good time with Pitbull, and that's guaranteed in my mind.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we just saw George Strait sell out Kyle Field, 111,000, the largest concert, I guess, in U.S. history, or at least that's what they're saying. Good for George Strait, man. Dude's in his 70s, sounding great. I've seen George Strait a couple times. Good for him. He's playing stadiums at 72 or whatever he is. I'm not quite sure how old George Strait is, but I'm going to find out, because if I'm going to give him props, I need to give him the right props, because the guy could just be doing residency in Vegas.
Yeah.
And instead, he's 72.
There you nailed it. There you go.
Selling out stadiums. All right. I know you all love when Eric and I banter about who should be playing the SEC party that Texas is throwing on June 30th. We got football to talk about. Football season never ends here on the Flagship podcast. And between Eric's position previews and some of the work that we've done for the Insider, we do have some conversation to be had about the Texas Longhorns. And I think we'll start off with Quinn Ewers because, Eric, you've done position previews so far, quarterback, running back, receiver, and in the Insider last week. If you're not a annual member at Horns 24/7, time to get on board because recruiting's going through the roof. In fact, Texas just got a commitment from the 2026 class, Dia Bell, one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the nation, according to the 24/7 Sports composite ranking. And our guys, Hank South and Jordan Scruggs, have been just all over the official visit weekends that have been happening and are still happening, and all the close battles that that Texas is involved in the recruiting game. And so make sure that you are an annual member at Horns 24/7 so that you get all the perks, including VIP access to every team site on the preeminent 24/7 Sports network. And Eric, I was going to ask you before we get into Quinn Ewers and how he's taking his leadership maybe to a whole new level, what your favorite college football preview magazine is. You know, is it Athlon? Is it Lindy's? Is it, I don't know how familiar you are with Dave Campbell's Texas football. That's certainly a big one here in the Lone Star State. And then Phil Steele. But 24/7 Sports is kind of the ultimate college football preview magazine because it is timely and happening every single day. My personal opinion. Your thoughts?
Chip, really quick. I saw our Hank South, of course, pinch hit for Chip when he was in Florida on the podcast. He posted in our work group chat a picture that appeared to be in a magazine. And I'm asking because I don't know. Do we have a college football preview, like an actual magazine?
No.
Okay.
So I think because, and I love the college football preview magazines like June, July, when those things come out. I just love to dive in. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. But I got to say, the 247sports.com staff, Chris Hummer and, Bud Elliott, Josh Tate, Brad Crawford. I mean, the list goes on and on. John Talty. These guys are doing a fantastic job of just constantly putting out great college football content. So make sure you bookmark, in addition to becoming an annual member at horns247.com and hanging out with me and Eric. And we do chats every day. We got you covered. Make sure you also bookmark 247sports.com so that you're getting all that great summer college football content. Chris Hummer, he's all over the transfer portal. It's a great staff, great team to be a part of, for sure. All right, Eric, let's get into it. Quinn Ewers, I put in the Insider that he, in the month of May, took his receiving core minus Silas Bolden, who was not yet on campus, and Gunnar Helm to South Lake, kind of bond, hang out, throw, do some workouts. But I thought this was a significant development for, Texas football, but also for Quinn Ewers and these receivers as they try to bond and get on the same page. No pun intended, Isaiah Bond. But, this is the kind of leadership that you would expect from a third-year starter, right?
No, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And listen, I don't necessarily, Chip, want to be a wet blanket because here's my thing, right? I feel like all quarterbacks or a lot of quarterbacks around the nation are doing something similar, right? Trying to get with their guys, trying to throw. I don't want to make too much of it. However, on the flip side, there is a measure of significance in the fact that, listen, this is, for all intents and purposes, an entirely new receiving core, right? Jonte Cook obviously was here last year. DeAndre Moore was here last year, right? Those two guys you think are going to be factors in the receiving game. And of course, Gunnar Helm. Can't forget Gunnar Helm, one of my favorite guys on the team, right? But more or less, you're talking about a new crew. So I do think you got to credit Quinn for taking initiative and saying, hey, guys, come up to, South Lake, hang out at my place. We'll get acquainted, because, the more reps you have with these guys, the better those things matter, right? But I guess, again, I don't want to make too much of it, because I feel like, listen, 75, 80% of quarterbacks around the nation are doing the same thing. And to the point that I feel like you're kind of hinting at, Chip, this should be expected from Quinn Ewers as a third-year starting quarterback, right? Like, you would know better than I. You were here in 2022 when he was just, from what I've heard and read and, talk with you guys, just want to be one of the guys, right? Just wanted to fit in, play his role. Of course, last year, once he assumed the starting quarterback spot out of spring camp, that gives you a certain measure of autonomy to be able to kind of assert yourself. And now year 3, so that's expected, right? So I guess I land somewhere, Chip, between obvious measure of importance, getting on the same page with your guys. Love to see that, but I don't want to make too much of it, because that this is what you should be doing, right? And also want to make too much of it, because we could fall in this trap where, like, you say, all right, well, Silas Bolden wasn't there in time. Is that why he isn't on the same page or up to speed as much as with the other guys? Like, I think once, everyone's back in Austin and they get things going, you're going to have more than enough throwing sessions to get Silas Bolden, Amari Niblack, whoever else isn't there, like, up to speed. And Amari was there for spring camp, so I don't want to imply that he wasn't there, but I'm just saying whoever wasn't there in South Lake, up there in is that Tarrant County? Is South Lake Tarrant County, Chip?
Look at you, getting to know your counties, my man.
I'm getting there, right?
Just make sure when you talk about the county that San Antonio is in, you say Bear County, not Bexar.
I would have said Bexar, so thank you.
There you go. I got you. Yeah, I mean, I think for Quinn Ewers, and I was told he's running this team this summer, and that's what you want. I mean, you want a guy who is taking control, who is laying down the intensity, the work ethic, the drive. Everyone talks about when Vince Young put on the whiteboard, the summer of 2005, if you want to beat Ohio State, meet me here at, 7:00 every night. And then that set the tone. And VY would, spend the whole workout saying, you're going to, to Michael Huff, he'd say, what are you going to do about number 7, the other number 7, Ted Ginn from Ohio State? You're going to let number 7 get all over you, or are you going to show him up? And you got to have that tip of the spear leadership, Eric, because we're talking about a Texas team that is being talked about as a possible SEC championship winner this season. And Steve Sarkisian came in on February 7th and said, I'm borderline obsessed with winning a national championship. And if I get one, I'm going to want 2. This is where Texas is living now. This is the zip code. And so the details, everything needs to be right on point to be able to make that happen. This is when you build that team camaraderie, chemistry. The Culture Wednesdays are happening now. And so I'm with you. You would expect this from Quinn Ewers, and it's good to see that it's happening, because the month of May was their off time, and this is when it happened. So good for Quinn Ewers to bring him up to his home and make guys feel comfortable and welcome, and work that connection, build that connection, because Steve Sarkisian has said that is a top priority for this football team. Quinn Ewers getting on the same page, these receivers getting very, very, very familiar with the offense so that there's not that drop off. Because Eric, when you think about the top 5 pass catchers last year are gone. Xavier Worthy, AD Mitchell, JT Sanders, Jordan Whittington, Jonathan Brooks. That is 76% of the team's receptions from last year, 82.3% of the team's receiving yards from last year, and 80% of the Longhorns receiving touchdowns from last year. And Jonathan Brooks represented 43.2% of the team's rushing yards last year. So even though there's talent on the roster, there still needs to be familiarity. There still needs to be trust. There still needs to be, comfortability within the offense.
Yeah, listen, I agree, and as you said, the rapport, the timing, you replace, the 5 leading pass catchers from last year. That stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? Like, you don't just wake up and all of a sudden have that kind of rapport with the guys. What I'm interested in, Chip, and I don't want to veer away from your topic, but I do think the two things coincide. We still have 8-10 weeks roughly till August 31st. And I wrote about this. So hopefully I'm not jumping the gun, Chip. Hopefully, I'm not jumping the gun on something you want to talk about on your outline. But
that's good.
Steve Sarkisian's receiver rotations, notoriously tight. The most, variance you saw in them was year 1, right? It was Marcus Washington, Josh, I'm forgetting the other kid, Joshua Moore, as well as Xavier Worthy, right? Outside of that, it's been 2 or 3 guys tops playing 80-85% of the snaps. So I guess what I'm hypothesizing, what I'm spitballing on the air is, at what point do these two things coincide? Does Quinn Ewers say, hey, here are some of the guys I think I've got the most rapport with, right? And does that play a factor? Who ends up on the field come August 31st? And B, which guys does Steve Sarkisian lean on? And does he expand that rotation? Because if you expand it, then you need to have rapport with 5, 6, 7 guys, right? Not that in essence you don't already, because, last year, AD, Xavier Worthy, Jay Witt, JT Sanders, Gunnar Helm, Jonathan Brooks, right? Those are 5, 6 guys right there. But I guess I'm just wondering, I made the case that this receiver room rotation goes 6 deep, right? How does that play a factor? Plus a Gunnar Helm, plus Amari Niblack, plus CJ Baxter, plus Jaden Blue. So I guess I'm just speculating there as to how that may play a factor in kind of what you talked about as far as getting that timing, that trust down, that, when it's 3rd and whatever, and you're looking for someone, you feel comfortable going to them.
Right. Right now, everybody's auditioning. Everybody's making their case. And the players always know. The players always know who should be playing. They're in the workouts. They're in practice. They know who's leading, who's not cutting corners, who's getting it done. You go into any locker room and you say, who has to be on the field? You'll get honest answers. Now, if it's too close to call, that's where it gets interesting. And of course, Steve Sarkisian's hoping it's too close to call because everybody's making these spectacular plays. They're right where they're supposed to be. They're running their routes at the right depth. They're all about the details. Where it gets a little janky is if it's, okay, well, this guy's not so great here, but he's better than that guy there. And obviously on paper, nobody's expecting those kinds of conversations to happen because you've got Isaiah Bond, Matt Golden, Silas Bolden, who've already shown you at the college level that they can get it done. And now you got these hungry, like the Wolves receivers in, Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett, and the early enrollee freshman led by Ryan Wingo. So I'm fascinated like you are, Eric, because Steve Sarkisian talked about, well, we kind of have a NFL type wide receiver rotation that's 4 to 5. No, you didn't. You had 3. And they all stayed healthy, so it was an easy answer. You had 1,000-yard receiver, Xavier Worthy. You had 10 touchdown catch receiver, A.D. Mitchell, and then Jordan Whittington. Those were your guys. Jonte Cook got 8 receptions in garbage time for 100 plus yards. So I'm fascinated because we're watching some of the best wide receiver recruiting going on right now in the 2025 class, even in the 2026 class. We're talking about DeCorian Moore and Jamie French, and these are guys who are in the considered the top 5 receivers in the country, and they're talking about going to Texas, like maybe more than one of them. So I think this year is going to tell a lot. And you and I've talked about Sarkisian at Alabama in 19 and 20 when he had Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith and John Mechie, and he did have a little bit bigger rotation, but then you also had injuries to Jalen Waddle that kind of impacted things. But he can do it. It's all about whether he trusts you or not. If he does, I don't think he'll have a problem expanding the rotation. I think it's, do they understand the concepts of the offense? Do they understand where they fit into every play and why that depth has to be so pinpoint? And are they doing the little things? Are they blocking? Are they, do they have all their motions down, all that? So I think it's going to be fascinating. And that rapport is going to be big time. And, I think the running back room is a big plus. So that helps. You've got Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter, who showed at the end of last year, after Jonathan Brooks went down with the ACL tear in November, that they can get the job done and then some. And that helps because you do need some certainty, and the offensive line. You've got 4 starters back and a projected 5th starter who has actually started a game and has played in 22 games. So that's a plus.
Chip, one last thing on the topic for me. I'm going to get really nerdy inside football here, but I'll tell you, it was Tyson Helton of Western Kentucky. Of course, I've referenced on this podcast because of his relationship with Kenny Baker, but Coach Helton, love Tyson, great dude. He talked about overhauling his offensive philosophy. Anyone who's seen West Kentucky football, Bailey Zappi, right? New England Patriots, throw the football around, air raid, the whole deal. But he really kind of overhauled his offensive philosophy when he hired Zach Kittley, right? Former Texas Tech assistant. I think Zach's at Washington State now, somewhere, if memory serves correct. Anyhow, where I'm going with that is this. Tyson told me, he's like, listen, offense, it's one of those things that is probably one of the most misconstrued deals in football, because people think it's Madden. People think it's NCAA football. People think you go in and you just kind of have your Cheesecake Factory worth of play calls and formations and groupings. That's not what happens. Chip, you know this, and I think the majority of our listeners do, but in case you don't, like how a game plan works is you take the playbook and you scale it down. Like each opponent, you're probably taking 50% of your playbook and throwing it out, and then taking another 15% of that and saying, all right, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't in any given week. And then you prep, right? So when I asked Tyson, I was like, hey, just conceptually, how easy or difficult is it to say we're going to go from 10 personnel to, 12, right? Just on any given drive. And he's like, we can do it, but have we prepped for it during the week? Have we adequately gotten the guys ready to do that? Are we putting them in positions to succeed? Probably not to go from heavy, like, for example, just on any given drive, 10 personnel to 12. You kind of have your install for goal line stuff with heavy, but you aren't just shifting, your personnel. You have your base grouping, and that's what you're running 60, 70, 75% of your offense out of. And for Steve Sarkisian, a lot of it we've seen is 12 personnel, right? And he kind of shifts between 12 and 11.
One back, two tight ends.
Thank you for clarity. Okay, so 11, one back, one tight end, 12 personnel, one back, two tight ends, right? Where I'm going with that is Sark is loving. We've talked about it. He loves his tight ends. Helm, Amari Niblack. We saw JT Sanders line up in the slot a lot, right? Whereas Helm was that inline tight end. These are all things that I wonder. And again, $10 million decision. Steve Sarkisian got the raise to be able to handle these types of decisions, right? But it's just another thing I think about in terms of the receiver room, because yeah, you want to get these receivers on the field, but if you're also going to do your 12 personnel stuff, and as you've outlined so well, Chip, that pre-snap motion, some of that window dressing that helps identify the defense for Quinn Ewers. It's not Cheesecake Factory, right? You can't order everything. So it's just something that I think about. And again, maybe I'm overanalyzing because it's the summer and we got time, but I think it's something that will be interesting to see how it plays out come August 31st.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you tend to think, okay, where's the strength? If my best playmakers are in the receiver group, do I run more 11 personnel, or do I just run my 12? I just rotate the receivers.
There you go.
You get this series, you get the next series, which is kind of what we saw with the running backs last year with CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue. Typically, you'd see, Baxter get the first two series and then Jaden Blue, and then it was hot hand. So, do you do that at receiver as well? Do you alternate Matt Golden and Ryan Wingo? Do you alternate Jonte Cook and Isaiah Bond? Do you alternate DeAndre Moore and Silas Bolden? And maybe you keep three of them together so that they're in for one series, and then the next, okay, guys, now it's Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore.
So. And Chip, really quick, somewhere an area that I think a guy like Matt Golden, I think just taking a look at his game, I think he had a chance to stand out. Someone's got to fill that Jay Witt role, Chip. How many times did we see Jordan Whittington seal off a guy on a block with some of the stuff that Steve Sarkisian likes to do as far as getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, maybe using Jordan Whittington, seal off and, kind of run around. Someone's got to hold that role. From looking at the game, and I don't want to say that any of the other guys aren't adequate, right? But just from what I've seen, I think that's an area that Matt Golden has an opportunity because, he's a special teams guy already, right? So he kind of knows some of that getting physical and doing some of those things. I think he has an opportunity because whoever sets himself apart in that aspect, Chip, I think really sets himself up to see a lot of playing time.
Yeah, and I think DeAndre Moore is making a strong case for that, and kind of got a little bit of a endorsement from Jordan Whittington when we talked to Jay Witt at Pro Day. He said, "Oh yeah, I think DeAndre Moore is coming," and so I agree. That's going to be a big role, and we know Silas Bolden can play outside. He can play inside. I think that guy's special, and I think he's going to be involved in the return game in some way or another. And if you lose Keelan Robinson, and Keelan Robinson had some big games. I mean, the Big 12 title game, he was dominant in that game. And he was a running back. If Trey Wisner is going to be that guy this year, Trey Wisner's not electric speed. I mean, he's fast, but he's tough. So he gives you probably more in between the tackles options in that third back role, or whatever Steve Sarkisian dreams up. But Silas Bolden sort of fits the Keelan Robinson speed and edge ability. So look, if it's going to take Steve Sarkisian 5 seconds in these workouts to see what they do best and then to draw up the plays, and we know he's very creative. We know, I'm thinking back to those plays that he had for Keelan Robinson in the Big 12 title game. And really throughout Keelan's career, he does a great job in that initial script of getting guys like that open. So Steve Sarkisian's got a lot on his plate to sort out. It's not so much those first 15 plays, Eric, for me, as it is as the game progresses, because he's got a lot on his plate. He's got to manage the game, and he's got to, if he increases his rotation, he's got to be mindful of that, or does he scale it back if it's a tight game? All that stuff is going to be interesting to watch, because I think there's some special talent on the, in that receiver group that he's going to have some interesting decisions to make.
Most definitely.
All right. So the running back, you also have previewed the running back position. You are a Florida guy. CJ Baxter is a Florida guy. He started the season last year as the starter. CJ Baxter. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be Jonathan Brooks. It ended up being Jonathan Brooks, but CJ Baxter. Give me your thoughts on how this running back room sizes up.
This is an interesting one. You talked about the preview magazines, Chip. I've got Athlon, I've got Lindy's, I'm sure. I'm a big digital guy with the Phil Steele. I like to have that on the computer, so I'll download that when it's available on the 19th. I'll be interested to see where Phil Steele has it, because between Athlon and Lindy's, they've got it split. CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue, who's going to be the starter. We know we've talked about on this podcast who leads this team in rushing. This is what I lean on when it comes to my belief.
And I'm on the record saying Jaden Blue.
You are. And I'm on the record saying CJ Baxter. This is what I lean on, Chip, and I'll be interested. You do a great job projecting the season stats, right? That was one of my favorite things you did last year when I just got on the beat. So I'll be interested to see what you do with that this year. But this is what I lean on when projecting CJ Baxter as the starter for me. Chip, how many times last year, no matter what was going on with Jonathan Brooks, or even when CJ Baxter opened the year as a starter and he got nicked up a little bit, Steve Sarkisian always came to CJ Baxter's defense. And it wasn't necessarily that he was being asked questions that were in a critical manner. Tries again. However, I think it's just Steve really, first off, he's talked about his maturity a ton, right? How many times have we heard Steve Sarkisian say that CJ Baxter's, top 1-2% as far as hardest workers on the team? And I think that endears him to Sark a lot. Not that Jaden Blue isn't that guy, but obviously you're talking about a guy in CJ Baxter, 6'1", 218. It looks like the second coming of Bijan Robinson, maybe just a little bit taller, but you take a look at the frame, the athleticism, it's all there. That's kind of what leads me, Chip, to believe that CJ Baxter will open up as the running back one. I remember I asked him entering the Iowa State game, him being Steve Sarkisian, and I tweeted this out. Sark took a little bit of umbrage with the question, but I asked him, hey, you see some of these 5-star running backs and they hit the ground running, is it maybe, do we just have to take a step back with CJ? And remember, he is a true freshman and there is an adjustment process to college football. And he'll have to learn some of the things that maybe some of the veteran backs did. And Steve said, hey, you'll have to show me all these, 5-star backs who hit the ground running. Okay, fair enough. I didn't have him on me to recite, not that I was going to debate him. But the point is, I think we look at running back, Chip, as a position that's easiest to kind of make the transition from high school to college. There is an adjustment process. So I say all that to say, listen, CJ Baxter is not going to be a 30 carry guy. This is not going to be the days of Ricky Williams and Cedric Benson, right? But is he going to get 15 to 20 touches? And is Jaden Blue going to get 15 to 20 touches? Absolutely. But I do think CJ Baxter will be the lead back just because everything Steve Sarkisian said and kind of talked about him last year, that's what hints to me that his position in the depth chart is still going to kind of carry over from last year to this.
Yeah, I agree. I think CJ Baxter's the starter. I think Jaden Blue ends up with the most carries at the end of the season, and I think it'll be close. But I think Jaden Blue is putting it together. And the fact that Tashard Choice compared him to Jahmyr Gibbs when I asked him at the Sugar Bowl media days, and yeah, that was like, okay, Jahmyr Gibbs. All right, that's the comp. Okay. That dude is electric. And of course, Tashard Choice recruited Jahmyr Gibbs to Georgia Tech before he transferred to Alabama. So these are first world problems, kids. That running back room is loaded. Look, they've got to tighten up their pass protection, their blitz pickup. They got to make sure their eyes are in the right spot. Some of those sacks, we talk about Quinn Ewers getting sacked 28 times last year. Washington gave up 12 sacks. That's part of it. Some of that was on the running back. Some of that was on JT Sanders. So, and some of it was on Quinn Ewers holding the ball too long. And so, that's got to get cleaned up if Texas is going to, win those tight games. Those are negative plays. They're drive wreckers. So, this offensive line, which I think you and I both feel is a strength of the team, they need to give up less than 28 sacks this year.
Oh, listen, there's no doubt about that. And it's interesting you mentioned the sack number because I almost was surprised, Chip. I mean, I knew at times, Quinn Ewers was under duress, right? I was like, damn, 28? Like, I didn't realize it was that many, And as you said, some of that falls on some of the guys like the running backs and the tight ends to pick up their blocks. But no, I mean.
And Malik Murphy, played a couple of games.
As well, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I just think, when I take a look at this running back spot, and especially getting a guy like Trey Wisner, you're getting three guys who are willing to get their nose in there and block, right? And I think that's one of the things, Chip, my memory serves me correct, that Steve Sarkisian praised CJ Baxter for when he made the decision to make him the number one back entering last year, was his pass pro ability. So definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. And as you said, we'll see. It's going to be interesting to see, kind of who opens the game, who closes the game, who gets which series, who does certain, things in that regard. But all in all, like you said, first world problems. There are plenty of teams who'd kill for one of those running backs, let alone three.
Yeah. We will continue to preview each position on the team, but there is this week's quarterback, running back, receiver. It's hot. All right, Eric, and we'll talk about Michigan next week.
We will talk about Michigan next week. Yes, sir. That will be out. That preview will be, we're taping this on June 18th. So that preview will be out more later than the 20th.
That's what we call a tease. So next week we will continue with the position previews. We will also have a preview of the Michigan Wolverines. Texas headed to the Big House September 7th. And I think that is going to be a really stiff test for this Texas offense right out of the chute. So we will get much more into that next week. All right. Before we get to some take it or leave it, Texas baseball, we know everyone's kind of wondering what's going on. I think it's going to be quiet for this week of June 18th, 19th. I think next week we might be talking about some news, some change, in the works. So stay tuned. Certainly stay tuned over at horns247.com for the latest. But I've said here on the Flagship podcast, I do think a change is coming. And so I think you will get some more intel on that next week. So stay tuned. And Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it?
As always, I'm ready.
All right, let's do it, folks. It's your favorite. It's take it or leave it. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on into some take it or leave it. Eric, you ready to go?
I am ready to go. I will kick it off. Chip Brown, offensive line is the strongest position group for the Longhorns in 2024. Take it or leave it.
Oh, wow. This is a tough one because you could really make an argument for probably 3 different position rooms for this. I'm going to leave this. I think the strongest position group for Texas is the running back room. I love Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter, and I think Trey Wisner is going to be dynamite. You can certainly make an argument for the quarterback position as well. And the offensive line. I mean, 4 starters back, one of whom is a projected first-round pick at left tackle in Kelvin Banks. And I think DJ Campbell's going to have a decision to make at the end of the year. So it's a tough one, but I will leave this, Eric. I'm going to say the running back room. What say you?
I'm going to leave it as well. And I was torn between running back and quarterback, but I am going to go with running back like you. The reason for me why it's not the strongest chip, and maybe this is, kind of monkeying around with the question. The starters are certainly there, but it's kind of untested. You knock on wood that none of those guys go down. You don't have a lot of experience back there. I'd say the only one being Cole Hudson, as far as a guy who has some experience, is kind of projected as a reserve. So in that sense, I just can't give it. It's a very strong offensive line, as you talked about, with a guy like Kelvin Banks leading the way. We're expecting big things. Jake Majors is really underrated. Great college center. I feel like we don't talk about him enough, but DJ Campbell, we think, is going to improve. We'll see what Cam Williams does at one of the tackle spots, Hayden Connor. But for me, if it were a 7-8 man group, I would give it that, but I just can't, considering, if something were to happen in the running back position, I feel like you have more there, Chip. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think it's a solid take, and I think that's an area. I think there's big time future talent on the roster at offensive line. When you talk about Daniel Cruz and Brandon Baker and that kind of thing, Trevor Gooseby. But I agree, they may not be there yet. It may not be plug and play if something happens to one of those starters, projected starters up front on the offensive line. All right, take it or leave it. Number 2, Eric Henry. Freshman Ryan Wingo ends up leading the Longhorns in touchdown receptions in 2024. Take it or leave it.
I was torn on this because I feel like everything about Ryan Wingo as a player leads me to believe he's a guy who, whether it's making a big play down the field, a long TD grab, or, just situationally, you get some of those errors down there. Not even, 50-50 jump balls, Chip. I'm just talking about you get in the red zone and you get a guy who can get open. However, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to give a name, and I'm going with Matt Golden, Chip. That guy's had a nose for the end zone really his entire career. Hasn't necessarily been, quote unquote, the number 1 guy yet. Of course, his freshman year was playing alongside Tank Dell, and last year, I guess you could consider him one of the guys. We remember, Chip, Texas playing Texas playing Houston. They had, Joseph Manjack and himself, and come on, I'm forgetting half of the kids there, but they had Danny Holgerson had a pretty stacked receiver room there. So wasn't quite the number 1 guy, but I could see him just based on his, size and guys in nose for the end zone, I think he's going to be the guy who leads the receivers and TDs, Chip.
Okay. You know what? I'm going to take this. I'm going to take it. Now, maybe it's partly because every time I check in with team sources, I'm hearing about Ryan Wingo, and had one source, I mentioned this in the insiders, say looks like young Julio Jones. But I'm thinking Ryan Wingo is that guy. He's just ahead of his years in terms of maturity, want to, and playmaking. So I will get you those projections that you like so much, Eric, with a specific number a little bit later, maybe next month. But I think he's that guy. So I will take that.
All right, to bring us home, Chip, Southeastern Conference will get 5 teams to this season's 12-team playoff, Chip. Take it or leave it.
Oof. I mean, you look around the other conferences, you look at the Big Ten, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, they're talking about a lot. You look at the ACC, Florida State, that's what, 4. People are kind of high on Oklahoma State. It's 5. And then you're going to get a group of 5 in there. That's 6. I mean, as loaded as it appears the SEC is at the top, Georgia, Texas, Bama, Ole Miss. I'm gonna take this, Eric. I'm gonna take this. It seems high, but I mean LSU. Oh my gosh, like Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, Bama. I'm gonna take it. Eric, what say you?
I'm torn on this. I'm going to leave it, and I feel like I could be wrong, but 5 plus the fact that you have the group of 5, right? So that means you got 6 of the 12 spots accounted for. I feel like the Big Ten, I mean, okay. So if you get 5 from the SEC, your group of 5 is 6. The ACC is going to be, the power conference is going to put 1 in, right? I could easily see the Big Ten putting 2, if not possibly a 3rd. The Big 12, 5 seems high only because it doesn't leave room for me, Chip, for that dark horse team. Inevitably, there's one dark horse team in a power league that has a great year, right? That's outside of the SEC. That has a great year.
Like TCU from a couple of years ago.
Exactly. And it's hard for me to see whoever that team is being left out, right? Like let's even for bleeps and giggles, we've been talking about the Hurricanes being back for 100 years, right? Like who knows if they sprout out? I mean, they took every quarterback they could find, so who knows if
Miami Hurricanes?
Yeah,
Cam Ward,
exactly, right? Florida State, you think they're going to be back, right? So even there, as I'm just kind of spitballing this, I just feel like it doesn't leave room for that one team in a power league that ends up is going to have 10 wins and surprise, and we weren't thinking about them preseason. So I'm going to leave it, Chip.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. And there you have it, kids. We appreciate you so much for listening to this episode of the Flagship Podcast. Like we said, please become an annual member over at horns247.com. Because until next time, for Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. We will see you over at horns247.com. We'll be back next week with all kinds of fresh new insights and frivolity. So until then, stay safe and keep the faith.